A conference featuring the who's who of the European far right has been shut down by the mayor of Brussels. The National Conservatism Conference was set to host names like Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, Nigel Farage, and French far right figure Eric Zemmour. However, just 2 hours after it began, Belgian police arrived at the event, turned the lights on like someone's mum at a house party, and told everyone to go home. Shortly after, the mayor of the Brussels district where the conference was meant to take place said this on Twitter. I issued an order from the mayor to ban the National Conservatism Conference event to guarantee public safety. In Etterbeek, Brussels City, and Saint-Josse, the far right is not welcome. According to Politico, the justification given by police to organisers was that the event posed a threat to public order, as a counter-protest was meant to take place later that evening. The conference had already had to change venue twice due to other mayors in the Brussels regions refusing to allow the event to go ahead in their districts. As you can imagine, the police's action caused quite a stir. And here's the response from former Home Secretary Suella Braverman, who was slated to speak at the conference.
I'm here with like-minded Democrats, democratically elected politicians, leaders and experts in their fields, and we are here talking about the issues that matter to the British people, but also many citizens around Europe, securing our borders, making our communities safer, and how to protect our countries. And it's a real shame that the thought police, instructed by the mayor of Brussels, saw fit to try and undermine and denigrate what is free speech and free debate. I remember the words of Mrs. Thatcher, and I'm going to misquote her, but the more ridiculous and far-fetched and extremist their attempts are to silence us, the more cheered on I am, because it just shows that they've lost the political argument.
And just finally on this, I mean, you're a former Home Secretary, you know the police, you know the law in the UK. Do you think this could happen in the UK?
Listen, what really does concern me here about what's happened here in Brussels is that last year, only last year, the mayor of Brussels was happy to host the mayor of Tehran here in Brussels, and yet he seems to be pretty offended by, as I say, democratically elected politicians, people from all over the European continent who are giving voice to millions of people talking about things like securing our borders. Could this happen in the UK? I generally think we have a culture of freedom of speech. We value debate and the free flow of ideas. It's a cherished foundation of our democracy, and long may it continue.
Now, it's pretty hypocritical for Suella Braverman, of all people, to be condemning the police for breaking up a political gathering. After all, this is the same woman who, while she was Home Secretary, routinely accused police of being too lenient when it came to pro-Palestine marches. Braverman also called for further action to be taken against the protests, which she mischaracterised as hate marches. So what seemed to happen here was that, in the eyes of the mayor at least, this conference was, well, a hate conference, which required further action. Maybe he thought so because previous National Conservatism conferences have hosted some pretty out there speeches. In last year's event, for example, right-wing commentator Douglas Murray said this.
This is in some ways still a controversial thing to say. Because in Europe in particular, nationalism, after all, sounds different depending on the country you're in. Nationalism in Israel sounds different to nationalism in America, sounds different to nationalism in Italy, sounds different to nationalism here in Britain. But the cordon sanitaire, which used to exist around nationalism until recent years, existed not because we didn't trust the idea of love of country, not because, I would argue, there was anything wrong with nationalism in a British context. It all came from a recognition that there was a problem with nationalism in a German context. And that is simply a historical fact. But I see no reason why every other country in the world should be prevented from feeling pride in itself because the Germans mucked up twice in a century.
Not sure a genocide counts as a muck-up, really. And in a double whammy, the same conference also saw Conservative MP Miriam Cates blaming cultural Marxism for the loss of hope in young people. Cultural Marxism, of course, being widely considered an anti-Semitic dog whistle. And I'm pretty sure it's not actually cultural Marxism, but rather over a decade of austerity, an increasingly aggressive and punitive state, and the enduring horizon of climate breakdown that's causing young people in Britain to lose hope. Helena, what do you make of all this commotion down in Brussels?
I think, first of all, I would say is I actually very much disagree with the Mayor of Brussels deciding to break up the conference purely on grounds of the fact that if we don't allow this kind of a level of congregation of people that we vehemently disagree with, and I believe is rightly to disagree with, their rhetoric can then same be used on us if there's democratic support for it. The kind of McCarthyism of saying, well, we can't let the communists be meeting up in Brussels at the same time. This is it's very much the kind of liberal approach to dealing with these issues, is trying to ban it rather than dealing with the problem. Also quite interesting that Braverman and Farage have decided to go all the way over to Brussels to try and parrot their ideology. Because interestingly, whilst there is a very large rise in nationalism sweeping across Europe, in the UK, it actually doesn't have that much of a kind of foothold in our society. It's turned people off the Conservatives. Some people have gone towards kind of Reform UK for nationalism, but it's only a small proportion of the population, whereas there's a much bigger market for it in the European continent very specifically. And careerists like Braverman are very happy to try and travel the world to try and become this kind of new political figure, as we saw with her backbench trip to Israel last week. So again, the Liberal approach to this problem to try and ban this from existence, because as you've mentioned before, the issue that's caused the rise in nationalism across Europe is a failure to deal with material conditions. And unless you deal with them, you can ban all of the far-right conferences that you want, because that won't make the ideology go away. In fact, it'll give these people a grievance narrative about how they're being shut out of the conversation by the establishment to be able to grift towards a wider audience. You have to fix material problems that have plagued Europe for the last however many years, for the last 40 years or so, that's caused the continual rise towards where we are right now. Globalization and continual deference towards the corporate culture of neoliberalism has allowed all of the jobs and the manufacturing jobs broadly across the European continent, all that getting subcontracted out to the global south, employing people on garbage wages to therefore hollow out the manufacturing capacity of these countries, which they're never going to get back. They don't have the kind of financial services sector that we do. And we're seeing the failures, as Aaron pointed out last week, across the European economy. And this general malaise in terms of the working classes, especially in these countries, is not being solved by liberal politics over there. And on top of that, we have the continual kind of cultural problem we see with people come up against the refugee crisis all across Europe. And of course, this is a big problem of Western interventionism that's continued ever since very much the last 3 decades in which this period has led up to. We've continually been intervening in countries, destabilizing regions and causing gigantic refugee crises. And unless we fix these material conditions that are leading to the rise of these nationalist forces across Europe, offer an alternative, a proper, realistic grassroots alternative that's going to bring these people across in economic terms, rather than allow them to get sidelined by kind of cultural conservatism, they will never be able to solve these issues by trying to ban it away from relevancy, because it'll only find other channels to be able to promote itself.
Having the police breaking up far-right gatherings is not real anti-fascism. It's not it's not substantive anti-fascism that really gets to the core of it. I think it's just funny watching Suella Braverman getting a little taste of her own medicine and being kind of upset about it.